The Ancestral Trail, Book 22, Zyton and the Curse of Loktar. First published by Marshall Cavendish, 1993. Based on a story by Frank Graves. Numbed by Melek's sudden disappearance, Richard and Orcan gaped open-mouthed at the slide down which he had vanished. As they stared, there came the grinding of stone against stone, and the slab tilted up into its former position. It locked into place with a heavy click. The hillside looked just as it had before, a seemingly natural formation of eroded rock strata. Orcan was the first to move, prodding and pulling at the ground in search of the hidden passageway. "If you go on like that," Richard warned, "you'll end up disappearing like Melek. We don't know how that trap was sprung, and there could be more waiting for us." Richard and Orcan started checking the ground where Melek last stood. At every moment they were prepared to throw themselves to one side in case they sprung the trap. Then Richard spotted Melek's glasses. He picked them up and searched the area with renewed vigour. Still they could not find what would gain them entry to the secret passage. Reluctantly, the two walked on down the hill until they reached the valley floor. They scouted the immediate area, inspecting every nook and cranny for clues. It was as if the earth had swallowed the scribe and his books. Eventually they had no choice but to abandon their search and move on.
"What are we going to do without the Book of Prophecies?" Orcan asked in a glum voice.
"What are we going to do without Melek?" Richard shot back. "Not just the Book of Prophecies. For now, I think we should head for the pyramid. Getting the pod is our main priority, and Melek knows that. If he can, he will head for the pyramid too." They trudged along a path through the valley. At closer quarters, they saw that the landscape was dotted with clumps of greenish-brown trees. From either side came eerie rustlings. For all the two knew, Melek might even now be lost among those trees, surrounded by whatever creatures were making the noises. As Richard pondered Melek's fate, he got his first close-up view of the pyramid. The structure soared, smooth-sided from the ground, its architectural precision standing in sharp contrast to the rough landscape around it. It was clad in sheets of polished amber, whose translucent surfaces shone golden in the sun. As they drew nearer, Richard and Orcan saw that the blocks around the base of the pyramid were carved with angular hieroglyphics. Richard took out the pathfinder and walked around the pyramid, searching for an entry. The arrow indicated a slab at the bottom of one of the pyramid's sloping faces. He and Orcan pushed on it, but no matter how hard they pressed, searching for a hidden catch, the amber slabs remained seamless. "Well, the pod's in there," Richard said, "but the entrance is hidden. Orcan, where would you put a door so that people couldn't find it?"
"Well, where they couldn't get at it," Orcan said. "Maybe higher up the pyramid?"
They shielded their eyes and peered up the gleaming slope. Just above their heads, a section of amber looked out of place. It receded slightly from the others, and was set within an image that was different from the other carvings. Orcan climbed onto Richard's shoulders and felt around the carving. There came a click, and the amber slab slid sideways. With one smooth movement, Orcan swung himself into the opening, then reached down to haul Richard up after him. They found themselves in a stone lobby, whose floor was covered with dust. A heavy stone door was set in the far wall. Richard and Orcan were halfway across the lobby when they heard a deep rumbling sound. The floor beneath them was sinking in a solid block. It was like being in a high-speed lift. For a moment, Richard and Orcan felt as if their feet were going to lose contact with the floor. Their stomachs lurched as they plummeted down into the dark. There was no way of telling how far they had travelled, when a welcome heaviness within them signalled that they were losing speed. There came a steady crunching of stone against stone, and then they stopped altogether. Richard and Orcan were at one end of a cavernous chamber. The walls gave off a strange amber glow. At the other end of the room squatted a slope-sided block of stone, topped by a flat lid. They had gained access to the heart of the pyramid, its tomb chamber. pod must be in the tomb, Richard said without consulting the Pathfinder. Let's hope there's an easy way into it. They stepped off the platform that had brought them there, and, as soon as they were clear, it shot back through the ceiling to the lobby above. As far as Richard could see, there was no other way out of the room. Their only hope was that the tomb itself would somehow provide an exit. They walked up to the tomb. Its surface was covered with figures and symbols. "There must be a catch somewhere," Richard murmured as he started to feel his way over the carvings. Suddenly, Orcan grabbed Richard's arm. "What's that?" he whispered. The warrior's keen ears had picked up a dry, rustling sound from the opposite side of the chamber. "You carry on searching," Orcan said. "I'll go and see what it is." He drew his sword and slid quietly round the corner of the tomb. Advancing towards the centre of the room was a strange creature, half bird and half reptile. Its lower body was that of an iguana, but a pair of wings sprouted from its shoulders. 3 separate necks, scaly at the base, became more feathery towards the top, and each ended in a head equipped with a curving, toothy beak and glittering, gimlet eyes. The creature spotted Orcan at once, and its expression turned vicious. The 3 heads jerked backwards as the beast surged into attack. "Get back, quick!" Orcan shouted to Richard. Even as Orcan spoke, Richard pressed a bulbous outcrop on the tomb's side. The lid slid slowly back. "Got it!" Richard shouted. The monster's 6 eyes had widened in horror as the tomb opened. Orcan stared at his former foe, and it backed off, turned tail, and fled, disappearing as if by magic through the far wall. "What did you do?" Orcan asked. "Well, just open the lid," Richard replied. "What's wrong?" Orcan was telling Richard what had happened when they heard a grating sound. Then the stone platform thumped to the ground. A small figure stepped off the lift, and it whizzed back up. "Richard? Orcan, are you there?" a voice cried out. It was Melek. They rushed over to greet him, clamouring for news of his journey. The scribe quickly told them how he had fallen through a trapdoor and into a maze of tunnels. Then, more by luck than skill, he had found his way out and consulted the Book of Prophecies. "I came to the pyramid as fast as I could," he said. "I wanted to stop you before it was too late." Melek sat down and read out the verse from the book. "Deep in geometric gloom, do not open long-sealed tomb. The curse of evil then will fall, not on one but surely all. Seek instead the golden prize that evil guards with 6-fold eyes. Follow where alone he goes, above the prize, below who knows." "I wonder what the curse is," Richard said as the scribe closed the book. "Well," Melek began, "I managed to decipher the inscriptions on the pyramid's outer wall." "You can read them?" Richard interrupted. "Of course," Melek said. "This is the tomb of Loktar, and it is guarded by Zyton, a 3-headed monster. Opening the tomb sets off a self-destruct mechanism. The pyramid will sink into the ground, taking with it Loktar and whoever dared open his tomb." Melek looked at their horror-struck faces. "You haven't opened the tomb, have you?" Melek said shakily. Richard and Orcan nodded and turned towards the tomb. Already the lid had slid more than halfway off, and a dank haze was rising from inside. They ran over and tried to shove the heavy stone slab back to its former position. Their efforts were useless. The lid continued to grind open. The smell that came from the tomb was beyond description. "Let's get out of here," Richard shouted. "We'll follow the creature that Orcan saw. It had 6 eyes. Where did he go out?" Richard asked Orcan. Orcan led Richard and Melek to the wall through which Zyton had disappeared. A zigzag crack ran from floor to ceiling. It was a door of some sort, but how did it open? Suddenly Orcan gave a shout. On the floor, some little way from the wall, was a worn patch of stone. Orcan stepped on it, and the wall slid apart to reveal a flight of steps. They rushed through the gap. As they did so, they heard a noise from Loktar's tomb. Once through, Richard searched around for the closing mechanism. A horned emblem was carved on the floor. Richard pressed down on it with his foot, and the wall closed silently. But just before it did, Richard thought he saw a hand reaching out of the tomb. The companions ran up the stairs in a headlong rush. The steps were cold, hard, and slithery with dust. Suddenly there came a rumble from the bottom of the stairs, the sound of the secret door being opened. The companions smelt the stench of Loktar's tomb at the same time as they heard the slow shuffle of his corpse coming towards them. The stairs turned a corner and stopped abruptly in a wall of solid rock. There was no way out. The only route, as far as they could see, was back the way they had just come.
"It's a dead end," Orcan shouted angrily. "Where can we go from here?"
Richard took out the Pathfinder. Its tip pointed upwards and was shining brighter than he had ever seen it. He looked at the ceiling and gave a shout of jubilation. There, above their heads, was a metal grill. "That's our way out," he said. He unwound Kika's belt from his waist. As soon as it was free, the belt shot up and wrapped itself around the bars. Then it began to lengthen, and Richard held on to the end of the belt and hauled. Again the belt helped him, bunching back on itself like a python to rip the grill free. For a moment nothing happened. Then the bars burst from the ceiling in a shower of stone and mortar. Richard wasted no time. He hooked his fingers around the edge of the hole and pulled himself up. He found himself at the bottom of a tall shaft that reached up through the pyramid. At its end, far away, he saw a glimmer of blue sky. To one side, a pod glowed in a small niche. He snatched it up and wedged it into his pocket. It was as if Richard had set the curse in motion. The pyramid gave a lurch and began to sink into the ground. Orcan and Melek yelled in terror, and before Richard could lend them a hand, they had both scrambled into the shaft. With them they brought the rank, grave odour of Loktar's approach.
"The curse! It's happening!"
Orcan shouted. Already the pyramid was growling its way into the earth, with a noise that made normal speech impossible. Specks of loose mortar tumbled onto their heads. "We've got to get up there!" Richard shouted. At that moment, Loktar arrived beneath them. They saw a wrinkled face of incalculable antiquity staring up at them through dust-filled eyes. The pyramid lurched again, throwing Loktar off balance. He staggered sideways and slipped on the stairs. The trio heard his body slither down the treads. Richard felt a rush of hot air from below. His first assumption was that something had caught fire in the pyramid's foundations. The wind strengthened and intensified until it was a burning, howling gale. The three clung to the walls, but the searing hurricane was too strong. First Melek, then Richard, and finally Orcan were blasted upwards like so many particles of soot.